Yes, well, best laid plans, eh? So, good afternoon, everybody. I'll do the formal introduction for the benefit of posterity. So, my name is Rob Whittaker, and I'm the Vice Principal of St Edmund Hall, and it gives me very great pleasure to welcome all of you to our third In Conversation event. The In Conversation series is a student-suggested initiative with discussions, talks and debates taking place in Teddy Hall around the themes of diversity, culture, race and gender. And we could not have wished for a better speaker than Hall All-Arian Cat White. Cat was recently named on the Forbes 30 under 30 list. Amongst other things, she's a writer, actor and filmmaker. She's also a founder and CEO of Cassini Productions, a platform established to create opportunities, change the narrative and champion voices of black women and girls. Cassini Productions takes its name from 1976 American-Nigerian film Countdown at Cassini. Kat grew up between Northampton, Yorkshire and Wales before moving to Paris, Geneva and back to Paris again. And in between all this, she managed to graduate in English and French from University of Warwick before joining Teddy Hall to read for an MST in Women's Studies. In her bio on our college website, she offers the priceless advice to students today to just try everything and to be bold and fearless. Kat is currently engaged in what seems a wonderfully exciting mix of activities that include writing her first book, which I gather is going to be titled If We're Going to Heal, Let It Be Glorious. Providing advisory services as a gender expert for the United Nations, and working both in front of and behind the camera as an actor and filmmaker. Today, Kat will be in conversation with our fellow in French literature, Professor Wes Williams, who's also the director of the Oxford Research Centre in the Humanities, so named because it produces the wonderful acronym TORCH. They will discuss how Kat's writing and filmmaking have helped champion the experiences and voices of black women and girls. Kat, you're very welcome.
Thank you. What an introduction. Thank you for having me.
Thank you, Rob. You've taken many words out of my mouth by way of introduction, but I don't need to therefore start with the long introduction and we can dive in. We've talked a little bit about what we might talk about, and I thought it would be good, I say talked, we've met online. And the one thing I wanted to start by saying was how great it is that we're all in a room together. For this conversation. We've had a number of these conversations before online. It's really nice that we're in the same space, keeping a bit of distance. COVID hasn't gone away altogether, as we know, but we're enormously grateful to you for coming here, being in the space, and as we've just done, going around the room, just talking to people. It's partly what this is all about.
Yeah.
And I wanted to start with the question of, in a sense, how did you get to be who you are now? So what's the story that leads us to this room, to this place? We've heard about Northampton, we've heard about Warwick, we've heard about French and English, hooray. We've heard about women's studies again, hooray. But perhaps you could just tell us a little bit about how you get to be who you are now.
Yeah, it's a very good question, and I think it's probably one that you don't actually stop and think about that often. I think probably, I mean, you heard all the different places. So Dad's from Yorkshire, my mum's from Jamaica, via Wales, and I'm from everywhere between Northampton. I think probably growing up in the first place from that like really diverse and kind of very different mix of communities probably makes you feel in a way like you never quite fit in anywhere. But on the other hand, also that you sort of have, I always sort of think of it as a bit of a superpower that, you know, I've got all of these different places I can call home, even though really that feels that I'm probably quite isolated in some senses from people who like were born and bred in London and all their friends are in London. That's where they've always been and they've always known they wanted to do one thing. So I think that probably was a good starting point for just feeling as though I had quite a lot of things I wanted to explore in the world. And yeah, did my undergrad in English and French after thinking like, was I going to study law? And I was very interested in the idea of English law and French law, and I always liked this idea of, you know, how can I, like my biggest hero growing up was Emily Pankhurst, and everyone else was had their dolls, which I also like playing with my dolls, but like I was obsessed with Emily Pankhurst and the jam factory that they had, like all of these different things. So I think I knew that I wanted to somehow dive into that world, and I did my third year abroad was in Paris, and I was doing a language assistant, but then also working at UNESCO as an intern. I don't know how I did it all, but the Erasmus was only 12 hours a week, so that's how I somehow managed to fit it in.
Yeah, that's great thing about the year abroad.
Yes, it was the best year of my life still.
Yeah.
I loved it.
Yeah. Can I just pick up on two things already there?
Please, interrupt me whenever.
Well, no, the first one's the idea of not quite fitting in, being a kind of superpower.
Okay.
I really like that idea.
Okay.
Partly, I mean, I grew up with French and German literature as what I studied, and there's this famous story by Thomas Mann, Tonio Kröger, who's half Italian, half German. He's from the north, he's from the south, at least in that framework. And there's this famous sentence in his book where he says, I stand between two worlds. I'm in neither fully at home, and in the meantime, in German habe es inzwischen etwas unwohl. So in the meantime, I feel really not very much in place, or I'm kind of unwell, or this is a kind of dis-ease. And we're so used to the idea of mixedness or not belonging as a dis-ease, a lack of ease. And you're saying, actually, that can be a superpower. Tell me more about that.
Because it means that you have more of, I think it's Bayesian culture, they have a word, and I can't remember the word, but I know that in English it translates as all two, and it's, you know, you're not half, but you're actually full, and you're both, and I think that speaks really well to this sense that you can kind of grasp these parts of your identity or your culture or your passions, and they can all fit together to make a fuller picture rather than, you know, being little bits that kind of make you incomplete, I suppose. And I think if we're looking at that in the trajectory of a career, you know, I've been doing that internship, I come back, done my final year at Warwick, and had got this and I'd gone out back now to Geneva to a different UN agency. I was working on sexual violence in conflict zones. It felt like this is the dream, this is, you know, it was an amazing opportunity, but I just had this kind of itch I couldn't scratch, where I thought, I love this, but is this forever, you know, like I was like 21, and I just thought, how do I know that just because everyone says the UN's a really commendable, exciting thing to do, how do I know that that's actually what I should be doing forever? And I've always loved performing, and I've been so creative, and I just thought to myself, I kept saying, if I don't try it now, I'll never know. And I sort of say, you're not going to just go and try this, you know, at a later point in your life. So let's see, how can I go about this? And then I found the MST at Oxford, which looked like the dream course. I'd applied for one at SOAS, one at Oxford, and SOAS one was much more kind of related to the UN side of things, whereas Oxford was humanities and it was interdisciplinary, and it felt really exciting. And I thought, also, if I go to Oxford, maybe I could just try and audition for a play and see if I get a small part in a play and see if I like it. And I mean, as Enrique's already told you, I managed to get the lead role in all of them, which was amazing. And then I was, you know, there was no looking back from there. I thought, okay.
Again, that's interesting because it kind of doubles to some degree what you said right at the beginning. I was going to do law, and then I decided, no, I'll do French and English. So you opted away from a more sort of instrumental or obviously career-based decision. I'll do law because it'll get me a job. Two, I'll explore things a bit and the job can come later. Am I putting words in your mouth?
No, you're not. That is what it is. But of course, when you're 18, you're not thinking like that. You're just thinking, I didn't really know what law was. I just had an idea. Honestly, from things like watching Legally Blonde and thinking, wow, I could do that. But you don't really know what it entails. I tried to speak to different people, but I didn't really know anyone.
No, my 14-year-old boy is busy watching Suits. Maybe he's absolutely convinced he's going to love it. So I think you're right, that when things you watch give you an example of what you might want to be.
Yeah.
Which absolutely then brings us to what you now make, which is stuff for people to watch, amongst other things, which gives them an idea of what they could be.
Yeah.
So again, instead of choosing to stick with the UN, you thought I'd go into something slightly peripheral or not obvious. You know, nobody gets a job on the back of a women's studies degree necessarily in the same way as you do with a number of other more instrumental degrees. I'm just really kind of interested in this. You've made a set of choices which could seem to be the wrong choices if you're pursuing a particular kind of career or degree or course, but actually they've clearly worked for you because they've kept your options open and they've also enabled you to explore, as you say, interdisciplinarity and a whole range of things to do with gender, race, intersectionality and so on. What brings you though, specifically, to then, we're going to jump a bit, to setting up a production company, to saying, okay, I can act, I could be an actor. And of course, you could spend the rest of your life being an actor and so on, and that's a great thing to do. But somewhere you decided that's not enough either. There's, to go back to your itch idea, there's something where I've got to set up a production company. What's that about?
Mixture of things. One, being a young woman actor is not always the most fulfilling, I think, because, you know, at the point where I had started my company, I was spending a lot of time auditioning for like girlfriend, friend, wearing crop top, looking sexy, or do you know what I mean? Things that I just thought, okay, is this all there is? Two, COVID, it was 2020, and it was a time where, you know, we had time all of a sudden. I mean, I was still working for the UN, but the jobs, I was about to do a West End play that got shut down, and I suddenly was faced with, that would have been a 5-month job, and suddenly I was thinking, okay. So I was making my first film, Farewell She Goes, which kind of took inspiration from Dido Elizabeth Bell, who was the first mixed race heiress, but kind of looked to imagine we had this heiress, and she grew up with her cousin, side by side, a white woman, and just took that as inspiration for a story about friendship. And it was really simple, and you know, we managed to film it in the lockdown. And doing that, I realised that there is so much. It was just so exciting to be able to tell your own story and not be beholden to what somebody would write for you. Because I mean, acting in a way, you obviously make your own, but someone's putting words in your mouth. And often the someone is a man of a certain, just someone who's probably from a very different world to the world that I thought I was living in. And I realised that there was something incredibly exciting about being able to be the person to write those words, or be the person to facilitate different groups of people writing those words and telling those stories.
I mean, because to be the role, well, so there's 3 different roles here, aren't there? There's the actor, who's embodying, performing a particular exemplary, sometimes, role that, I want to be like Reese Witherspoon and Legally Blonde, whatever. I want to be like the people in suits or whatever. And that's an important role. And we know that people are affected, inspired, appalled, etc. by that kind of performance. Then there's the writer. You tell your story. But to then go and actually be the person who enables other people's stories to get into that space, that's a different move again, surely, isn't it?
Definitely.
Right.
Very different move.
Tell us about the difference in that move.
Yeah, that is the move, I think, as well. This is the one thing, maybe the one thing. It's one of the main things in my life that's taken me by surprise, because I think I founded my company. I thought, okay, I'll found a company, I'll make a bunch of films that I'm in, or that I've written, and it'll be, it's going to be all about me, and all about the stories I want to tell. And of course, I quickly realised I don't ever want to produce a film I'm in again, because it's horrible. But also, it was about, I just started to get so many people coming to me and saying, I've got this script, or I've got this idea, or I've got something, a story that I'd like to tell, and I've seen what you're doing, and can you help me tell that story? And suddenly, we're looking at not just stories which centre black women and girls, but, you know, films that I've made have looked at homelessness and coercive control and suicide, all of these different topics where people want to tell a story, they want to tell a story in a new way, which might mean working with a crew who aren't just white men or aren't just people who've come through film school, but actually people who just want to get a foot in the door and see how it works. And I always try and also do that, you know, even if there's no budget, I say, okay, I can't pay you, but why don't you hop on a Zoom with me and the director and you can just listen in. So trying to think about how we can change, what's happening behind the scenes as well. That's been the biggest surprise that has led to now having made, I actually don't even know how many films I've now made. And those aren't just me, these are like an amazing team of people who want to be part of a movement and a change.
So why is that not thankless work? Why is that not like, nobody noticed me, nobody knows I'm there? For somebody who's been centre stage, who the camera can love and who loves the camera, why is that work that you have found fulfilling?
That's a really good question. Because I think, again, one of the reasons why, if I were to imagine life where I was just an actor, I think because of the family I've been brought up in and because of coming at it from maybe a different point of view to just like, I want everyone to notice me, I think I would be quite unfulfilled because it wouldn't necessarily sit naturally to always want to be the centre of attention, even though of course I love that, and not many actors probably could say that they don't. I think it's about being part of a social change, and it's, you know, it's about driving something bigger than me and than even my friends. It's about thinking about who comes next. And you know, I'm only I'm 29 now, but even looking at some of you in your first year, what a difference that is, you know, to think about a 20-year-old versus me now. What about people who are 10 years younger than you? What about the 10-year-old who wants to change something? And that's why it feels like it has to be bigger. Otherwise, what's the point?
You're really helping me here by moving us to our next point.
Oh, good.
Which is, so if we followed to some degree your trajectory about how, you know, how does Cat White get to sit in this chair and be who she is, the next thing we thought we might talk about is, okay, what's it like for people in this audience? How's it different for somebody 10 years on from you? Not everybody's 19, some of you are in your 20s as well, but what do you perceive as the changes in the last 10 years since you were a 19-year-old at university? And how might it be different for these guys to follow a career path, a trajectory like you have?
Well, I'd actually forgotten that I'd said this thing of try everything. What was the quote you read me that I said? I didn't remember saying it.
It was to try everything and to be bold and fearless.
Wow. Well, I do think
everything was in capitals.
That does not surprise me. I'm always in capitals and I'm always doing exclamation marks as well. If anyone ever wants to email me, just be prepared for that. But I do think that probably is it. You know, Henrika did encapsulate it quite well, but I did have to have some really difficult conversations when I got here, or you know, whenever you get to a certain point in life and people want to question, so you're going to turn down a job at the UN and go and do a year at drama school. Okay, why? Or, okay, you're here, you're doing an MST, you've got 9 months, what on earth do you think you're doing? Doing all of this extracurricular stuff, like one would be enough, one would be challenging enough. So I think you have to be quite sure of yourself, which is a difference from even being 21, 22, having lived abroad for a year and coming to my master's, having spent a year in Paris. That was a massive difference in terms of just, I know a bit more about myself. I think at 19 I was very, as probably everyone is, a bit more trying to kind of be led than lead. So I guess it's about trusting in your voice as well, knowing that you can just try things, and also knowing that they don't have to work out, and it sort of doesn't matter if you get something wrong. I've done so many things where I've tried them and, you know, I apply for something and I never hear back. And being an actor, I get rejected pretty much daily. I'm just grinding myself for another audition, and at certain points you think, what's the point of this? But then you get that one job, or you kind of find that one thing where you make that one connection with someone. So I think for me it also has to be not caring, or at least being able to pick yourself up again if it doesn't work out, because it's not always going to work out. And if you're trying lots of things, inevitably you're going to have to face some knockbacks as well, which is hard probably for everyone in this room. There's a reason, like we are all at Oxford, it's because we don't like to not to be good at things.
Yeah. No, I mean, there's the other big part of your life, alongside acting, producing, writing, and it's threaded through all of this, is not acting but activism. And it's clear that you think of your cultural labour, we can call it that, cultural work, as, in a sense, coextensive with your activism, with your political, and it's an intervention in the world, rather than a bit of fluff or some nice stuff or some entertainment alone. So I thought we could spend a little moment thinking about, well, how do we define activism, or what does activism look like for you? What you own that term, it's on your site, you say I'm an activist. So what does that mean?
I mean, if we to look at the dictionary definition, it's, you know, it's an organisation, it's mobilising to make a change, which we see every single day. You know, the environment, political, actually, there's the threads of it are in our everyday life, I think, right now. There's no getting away from that. But I think one of the reasons as well why I said pause to the UN and have now found myself back there in a new way was that I just got really bogged down with the idea of being in an office doing sort of stuff that I couldn't see how. I could see the bigger picture of how it could make a difference, but I couldn't see how on a day-to-day level what I was doing mattered. And I think that's kind of the founding element of how I call myself an activist, which is in the sense that I look at the community around me and I look at my sphere of influence and I look at the people I can have an impact on or the people I can help elevate, and I start from there. And I think that's the production company is the perfect example of you can literally create something that can have a direct impact on someone's life, and then we move out from there in terms of bigger things like the UN, although all of my projects with the UN are intentionally now starting quite small scale in small scale communities.
So you've used the word impact there. That's a buzzword in academic life at the moment. But it's also an interesting word that again is part of your work, because you have this impact fund, for example, which is small scale in terms of the amounts, but is clearly potentially transformative. Do you want to explain why you do that? Yeah,
well, that was 2020 to 2021, and that was again because that also came about in the wake of this massive resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement, and suddenly everyone everywhere wanted to do something, had something to say, and it was, you know, amazing, but it was also very jarring because you thought, okay, there's all these sweeping statements and gestures and everyone's got a black square on their Instagram, fantastic. I don't know if anyone felt the same. It was like, okay, nice, but then what? And really, the only thing that mattered to me was that a friend who used to touch my hair and say, it's so cool you've got an afro, might change her ways. Or, do you know what I mean? I cared about the small things. I didn't care about massive L'Oreal or someone doing a black square on their Instagram. I wanted to know about what individuals were doing to change their own, to unlearn some of their learned behaviours. And I also cared about how can we help people? How can I, you know, I didn't have much at the time, but I had enough that I thought, what if I could give as much as I can to people who would be able to do something bigger with it? So I really looked for projects that would be small scale but have a massive impact on their communities, and it was so amazing, that first cohort. And one of them was she was called Sandra. She was from Newport, where my aunt and where my mum was from, and I had no idea. She even actually knew my family, and she had an amazing project called Caribbean Meals on Wheels. So she was bringing like Jamaican food to the elders in Newport so they could have the food that they loved. And it was so simple, and I think she was able to just buy some of the equipment and get started. But it was that simple grant of £500 that enabled her to just start it, and from there she's been doing so much more. And I think it's about how do you begin, and it often feels too overwhelming. So if you just know how to start, things fall into place from there, I think.
Yeah. And I think, so I think both this college and actually Torch and other bits of the university are also understanding that this impact question can be rethought as small stuff, as seed funding that then leads to other things. And it goes back to the point we were making earlier about being allowed to fail. Because if you're giving somebody 500 quid, it makes a real difference to their situation. But also, if it doesn't work, fine, you've got another chance to go forward. And I think it's interesting that you've sort of got into that space as well. You clearly like to have your fingers in quite a lot of different pies as you go. And I think that's, again, it's inspiring, and it's also, I think when we come to the questions, I think it's question 4, folk in the audience is, so how many plates can you juggle at any one time, or how many plates can you keep in the air at any one time, without either letting them fall or just running out of energy, and actually in the end not being very effective, because so we've kind of thought about how you define activism, and we thought a little bit about the different spheres in which activism might be located. I'd like to take you back to university for a minute. And at that stage, you were principally involved in thinking about women's studies and gender and violence and power, and then putting on shows. Is that right? Yeah. Were you already an activist in your own soul at that point, or did that come later?
I think I was, in a way, because, for example, I wrote my dissertation on Beyonce, but I did have to put up a little bit of a fight for that, because obviously when you say it like that, it sounds very untraditional, I suppose. But I was able to talk about where it was coming from, and it was rooted in, I was looking at food and resistance, and I started with Aunt Jemima, who was kind of this persona born out of slavery essentially, and I moved all the way down to, it was 2016, I was 17, so Lemonade, Beyonce's album had just come out. So I looked at how food had been used as a means of resistance, like throughout history in a certain period. And I think that is a good example of, to me as well, activism, you have to be brave enough to turn away from what everyone else is thinking and doing. And that probably is, I guess, that is a presiding memory of that. I think I started working again one day a week for the UN, which also took me a bit out of college life, where maybe in a way could get quite focused on going out, or I don't know, if you wanted to, you could just have a great time, which I did. I had a really great time. But I did still have this kind of outward looking, whilst kind of, I think maybe as well having the college, having the hall was this centre of gravity, was really formative for me, because I'd been everywhere, and I hadn't really found that community where I felt like I could really try things, and it didn't matter. Nobody knew me from before, so it wasn't weird that I was suddenly trying acting, or it wasn't weird that I was writing a dissertation on Beyonce, because I was new and I was able to just try and see who I became, I guess.
So now you're talking about community, which is, again, threaded through a lot of what you do. And I'm interested that you think of, or you were able to think of the college as a community where you could, to some degree, reinvent yourself, or at least explore stuff that you weren't already known for, or that you hadn't already decided this is me. And again, getting ready for questions, I'd be interested to know whether people here think of the college as a kind of, A, as a community at all, and B, as a place where you can invent yourself, reinvent yourself, explore options, not options, don't like the word options, explore ways of being that aren't
Yeah.
necessarily predetermined and prefixed.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm with you in thinking that making a choice to write about Beyonce in your dissertation is a form of activism, because you're extending the canon, first of all, within a quite restricted space, but also extending the history of sugar, which is a big deal. You know, it's a big deal in empire, in terms of history of empire and so on, and the way in which that becomes part of popular music and particular characters such as Beyonce. And you know, watch this space, and Beyonce might yet come here as a visiting professor in due course. And it's certainly one of the things that the university is shifting towards, I think, since your time, is this space between, on the one hand, this criticism, history, and so on, and on the other, creative practice, and trying to find a space in the middle between those two. So interdisciplinarity, yes, but this time between research and practice, and research as practice, and practice as research, and indeed activism as a triangulation point in there. Do you think it's right that universities should be doing that, or should universities stay, you know, as this separate space from the world of business, of entertainment, of product making of various kinds?
I think I would bring it back to community, and I would say that the university is a community that's serving multiple communities within that, but it also has a real chance, an opportunity to reach out to the other communities that surround it, whether that's geographically or whether that's in terms of connections, thematically, academically. And I think it seems to me, but of course this is a personal opinion and I'm not an academic, but it seems to me a missed opportunity if academia remains in a bubble. And I think, I mean, I'd be really interested in Tanya, for example, as well, who's just joined us. What's your title?
Early career fellow.
Early career fellow, exactly. But who comes from also, you know, an activist background. I'm interested in people who fuse academia with activism, because I do think that there is such a scope for creating and really pioneering a change that is founded in a body of research. It's taken seriously, and I think we have so much to learn. So many of the academics I really admire are also activists, and their writing treads that line between okay, here's what I have researched, observed, and here's how I'm applying it. And for me, yes. But I'm also speaking from a humanities perspective, and I don't, you know, does that apply if we're talking about mathematics, for example? Possibly not. I don't know. There were no mathematicians in the room.
Well, yeah, there are some.
Where are your mathematicians?
There are all sorts in the room, photographers and so on.
Yeah.
So yeah, clearly for me too, actually, and that's why one reason I'm in Torch is to try and pursue that change that's already happening, but create a bit of momentum. I think we should leave time for questions in the audience in a second.
Yeah.
But before we do, I just wanted to pick up on, again, something that's clearly threaded through your work, and that is the notion of a resource, certain kinds of resource, financial resources, producing resources, that you become a resource for other people who want to tell their story, get their voice there and out there. But I was again struck with, doing a bit of like with Robert, picking up on things that you've said, and you might think, I don't remember saying that, but you did say somewhere that both celebration and joy are kinds of resource.
Yeah.
And again, that's an interesting thing to say, like with the superpower being kind of mixed or between spaces as a superpower. Just here too, to think of celebration and joy as resources, I'd just like you to reflect on that. What do you mean by that? How is that a resource? You know, you might go, yeah, finance, that's a resource, a company, that's a resource, but joy, a resource, celebration, a resource. What do you mean?
I mean, it's a long journey to make real change, and you touched on some of it earlier in terms of being burnt out, or, you know, I have seen that, and I, to be honest, I'm in that side of there is so much going on. I can't do everything fully. And I think that's a really important point, just to side note on, because I also would never want to push this agenda that you can and should do everything, although I do think you can, but within reason. Hope that makes sense. Ask me a question like that. But I also think, for me, it comes back to this sense of working with what you have around you. And what I see around me, if I'm talking about race activism and gender equality, are the incredible women in my life and the little 10-year-old imaginary girl that we're talking about, who I hope could become Prime Minister or whatever it is that she wants to do. And I think about that, and I find it overwhelming if I look at all of the pain and all of the stuff stopping us from getting there. So I'd rather focus on, this is what I can do to help achieve that. This is what you have already within you. How do we kind of bring all of these things together and focus on a celebration? And even the dissertation we spoke about, which started as resistance, is now becoming my book, which is being published next year. It's changed so much because it's about celebrating, and there are so many narratives of, even a lot of the stuff I've seen this Black History Month is about the legacy of slavery and, you know, the traumas that Black people have faced, or any marginalised group has faced, and they exist and they will always exist. But for me, it's rather about how do we celebrate, and one of the biggest ways I think we can actually inspire change is by showcasing all of the incredible things that women, that gay people, that disabled people have been able to achieve and have survived throughout all of the kind of oppression that they face. So for me, it keeps me inspired, and I think it's how we will actually have a more impactful, that word again, change. And also my middle name is Joy, so I'm just honouring my mum.
Well done, whoever named you. Time for questions. Yeah, you've generously said that you'll take some questions. So, are there any in the room?
Yeah, any hands